What happens when raw truth collides with polished spin? When a fearless congresswoman faces off against one of Trump's fiercest defenders? On this night, under the blinding lights and rolling cameras, Jasmine Crockett didn't just argue. She shattered the narrative. Kellyanne Conway came in with rehearsed lines, but Crockett came armed with fire, facts, and an unshakable will. This wasn't just a debate. It was a battle for credibility. And by the end, only one voice stood unbroken. The studio lights burned bright, reflecting off the polished floor as cameras prepared to capture what would soon become an unforgettable showdown. On one side of the table sat Kellyanne Conway, her reputation as a fierce political strategist preceding her, leaning forward with eyes sharp and confidence born from years of sparring in the highest levels of power. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm and collected, her steady presence like an anchor in stormy seas. While Conway projected fire, Crockett embodied focus, adjusting her papers with quiet precision as if to signal she wasn't here for theatrics, but for truth and logic. The host's introduction faded into the background. What mattered wasn't the preamble but the atmosphere, heavy with anticipation, as the audience at home, the studio crew, and millions online sensed that this wasn't just another debate, but a collision of worlds. The raw force of Conway's relentless aggression against Crockett's unshakable composure. For a moment, the air hung still, like the pause before a lightning strike, until Conway shattered it with her voice, slicing through the silence with sharp precision. Her words weren't merely arguments but attacks, dripping with disdain as she waved her hand dismissively toward Crockett. Congresswoman, people like you don't understand how the real world works. You stand on your soapbox, but when it comes to actual results, you fall short. That's the truth. Every smirk, pointed finger, and exaggerated shake of her head was designed to corner, belittle, and dominate, her body language as aggressive as her tone. The audience shifted uneasily, some leaning forward, drawn in by her intensity, while others frowned at the hostility, as cameras zoomed in to capture every flicker of venom in her expression. To the untrained eye, it looked like she had the upper hand. Her speed, volume, and energy classic tactics to overwhelm. But beneath the noise, something else was brewing. Jasmine Crockett hadn't flinched. Not once. Kellyanne's words still echoed across the studio, but Jasmine Crockett didn't rise to the bait. She didn't lean forward, didn't match the volume, didn't even blink in the face of Conway's storm. Instead, she drew in a measured breath, her calmness so deliberate it seemed to bend the room's energy toward her. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, firm, and unshaken, like a judge delivering a verdict. "With all due respect, Kellyanne," she began, eyes locked on her opponent. "What you call results, I call manipulation. And what you dismiss as inexperience, I call integrity." The words cut differently. Not loud, not rushed, but razor-sharp, crafted with precision, designed not to overwhelm but to expose. The silence that followed was heavier than Conway's earlier barrage, the silence of control shifting. Crockett leaned forward, not to attack, but to anchor her presence. "You can talk over me. You can try to spin reality. But the facts don't change just because you raise your voice. Truth doesn't bend to volume. It stands on its own." The cameras caught it. Conway's confident smirk flickering for just a moment, irritation and surprise flashing across her face, as the audience straightened in their seats, sensing the momentum slip. What began as Conway's dominance was now transforming into Crockett's quiet command of the stage. And the debate shifted from who could shout louder to a collision of two visions of America. Conway, her voice still laced with fire, pressed forward with absolutes. "This country needs strength, and that strength comes from tradition, discipline, and leaders who don't bend to every protest or every emotional outburst." Her words, sharp and rehearsed, were crafted for headlines, not dialogue. But Crockett countered with conviction that couldn't be staged. "Strength without compassion is cruelty, and discipline without justice is oppression. You talk about tradition, But whose tradition? You talk about order. But at what cost? The contrast was stark. Conway's ideology rooted in rigid control and conformity, Crockett's in inclusivity and progress, her sentences echoing with the weight of history and the urgency of the present. The audience became the battlefield. Conway supporters erupting at her fiery one-liners, Crockett's drawing nods, murmurs, and gasps from those who saw themselves in her defiance. The energy in the room pulsed like a live wire as cameras captured it all. Not just a debate, but two women standing as symbols of a deeper struggle. Old power versus rising voices, authority versus equality, the past wrestling with the future. As the clash intensified, the audience was no longer passive observers. They had become part of the story, each sentence landing like a strike and each reaction shifting the storm. On one side, Conway's words drew applause from those who clung to the comfort of tradition, her proclamations of law and order, greeted with claps that echoed like drumbeats of resistance against change. But then Crockett's voice would cut through, sharp and unflinching. "Order without justice is nothing but control," she thundered, her words striking the crowd like sparks in dry grass. A wave of murmurs swept through before erupting into cheers, the cameras catching faces, young and old, activists and ordinary citizens, lit with recognition that someone was finally voicing what they had carried for years. The air grew heavy, electric, every pause a held breath, every exchange a strike of lightning. Moderators exchanged nervous glances as the debate slipped beyond their control. No longer a dialogue, but a live showdown with the audience as judge and jury. Each reaction amplified the stakes. This wasn't just Conway versus Crockett anymore. It was America itself, split down the middle, deciding which vision of its future it would embrace. But Conway wasn't satisfied with verbal jabs. She shifted into what she believed was her knockout phase, her voice sharper, faster, wielding speed as though it could cement dominance. Leaning forward, she pointed an accusing finger at Crockett. "You stand here and lecture about justice," she snapped. "But where are the results? Crime is up. Families are afraid. Communities are broken. Your so-called solutions don't solve problems. They create chaos." Her accusations rolled like cannon fire, laced with half-true statistics and cherry-picked data. Not meant for dialogue, but for domination. The strategy was clear. Flood the stage with outrage, control the pace, and never give Crockett a moment to breathe. The crowd roared, her supporters clapping furiously as cameras captured her triumphant smirk, her eyes glittering with confidence that the tide had turned. Yet beneath that confidence brewed a dangerous miscalculation. Conway believed Crockett was cornered, but in reality, Crockett was waiting, calm, composed, storing every word like ammunition. The offensive had been launched, but whether it was Conway's breakthrough or the start of her unraveling was about to be revealed. When Conway's storm of accusations finally paused for breath, Jasmine Crockett rose. Not with panic, but with the deliberate calm of a fighter who knows exactly where to land the blow. Leaning into the microphone, her tone crisp and her words sharpened like a blade, she began. "Ms. Conway, you speak of crime, but you forget to mention the crime of misinformation. You weaponize fear, but I deal in facts. And facts, unlike your soundbites, don't bend for applause." The room stilled as Crockett's voice carried the weight of authority, steady and unflinching. She didn't match Conway's fury. She dismantled it. "You talk about broken communities? Let me remind you, those communities are resilient. They are not broken. They are failed by leaders who would rather posture on television than deliver real policy. Leaders who thrive on division instead of building solutions." "Does that sound familiar?" Gasps rippled across the audience, her precision surgical, each word slicing into Conway's narrative and exposing its hollow center. Raising her chin, her gaze locked on Conway, she delivered the strike. "You flood the stage with noise. I flood it with truth. And the truth, Ms. Conway, doesn't need a smirk. It stands on its own. The crowd erupted, applause thundering through the hall. This time not divided but resonant. Even the cameras seemed to gravitate toward Crockett, capturing her as if history itself demanded the moment be preserved. For the first time that night, Conway looked shaken. The offensive had met an immovable wall, and cracks began to show. The energy in the room shifted. What had once been a tug-of-war of cheers and jeers now tilted unmistakably in Crockett's favor. When Conway tried to interject, her voice was met with scattered groans, a stark contrast to the thunderous applause Crockett had just received. Even some who had earlier clapped for Conway now sat with folded arms, their enthusiasm dimmed. Then it happened. A single student shouted from the crowd, "Facts over fear!" The chant caught on like wildfire, row after row joining in until the chamber swelled with the chorus. Cameras swung wide, capturing not just the debate, but the atmosphere. A living, breathing verdict delivered by the people themselves. Conway forced a smile, but it was brittle, defensive. She adjusted her papers, shuffled her notes, but the optics betrayed her. The once commanding presence now looked cornered, overshadowed by the rising momentum of Crockett's words. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't bask in the applause. She raised her hand to quiet the crowd, the gesture speaking louder than victory. It was about reclaiming dignity, restoring truth, and amplifying voices long silenced by political games. In that moment, Crockett wasn't just debating Conway. She was channeling the audience itself, becoming their voice, their shield, their representative in the arena. And the tide had turned completely. Sensing her grip on the room slipping away, Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her voice sharp, trying to pierce through the chants still echoing in the hall. "Let's not be fooled," she declared, her tone rising. "What you've just witnessed isn't leadership. It's showmanship. It's political theater meant to distract from the real failures of this administration." Her words landed with the force of a last-ditch strike, but the crowd's reaction was lukewarm at best. The earlier fire in her delivery now felt more like desperation, a scramble to reclaim ground she had already lost. Pressing harder, she waved a stack of notes as if sheer data could outshine the authenticity of Crockett's passion. "Ask yourselves this. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" she challenged, hoping the familiar line would rally the audience. But Crockett didn't flinch. Tilting her head slightly, almost pitying the recycled slogan, she stood steady as the crowd recognized the hollowness of Conway's playbook. What once might have been a rallying cry now sounded tired, outdated, irrelevant. A few clapped politely out of habit, but the electricity was gone. Conway's gambit, meant to be her turning point, instead underscored the reality. The debate had shifted, and she was fighting against the current. Crockett simply folded her arms, letting silence speak louder than rebuttal. It was a masterstroke, allowing Conway's words to wither in the heavy air of their own futility. The last card had been played, and it wasn't enough. The hall came alive with energy, cheers, clapping, and the steady hum of approval rippling from wall to wall. Jasmine Crockett stood calm in the storm, her poise unshaken, her voice rising above the roar like a steady drumbeat of truth. Leaning into the microphone, her tone measured but resolute, she declared, "America doesn't need distractions. America doesn't need tired slogans. What America needs is honesty, accountability, and the courage to face our challenges head-on. And I promise you this, I will never back down from that fight." The crowd erupted, not with polite applause, but with thunderous affirmation. The energy was raw, undeniable. Crockett had not only won the exchange, she had transformed the moment into a declaration of who she was. A fighter, a leader, a voice that refused to be silenced. Conway sat back, visibly drained, her earlier bravado now just a shadow. The contrast was stark. One voice clinging to the past, the other carrying the weight of a movement into the future. The cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face, capturing her fire, her conviction. This wasn't just the end of a debate. It was the birth of a viral moment destined to ripple far beyond those walls. As chants of Crockett, Crockett, filled the air, the truth was clear to everyone watching. History had been made. This was not merely a debate. It was a turning point.